Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. We have a current issues panel with us today, a regular feature here on the show. And today we're going to hit a variety of stories, including a recent court decision which will amend the Canadian sex offender registry, Elon Musk's Twitter takeover and his first move since taking the helm, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's vaccine apology, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford's refusal to testify at the Emergencies Act inquiry. Lots to discuss, and joining me now to unpack it all is political commentator Hannah Salamon-Vegh and Elliot Hughes, senior advisor at Summa Strategies. Why don't we start with one that's making the most headlines internationally, which is Elon Musk's finalized Twitter takeover. So he's at the helm. This has been a long time coming. Why don't you start us off, Elliot? What do you anticipate he will be doing now that he's in charge at Twitter?
Yeah, it's been quite the saga for Elon Musk to finally, reluctantly, I guess, take over Twitter. I expect to see some pretty big changes and some pretty big changes pretty quickly. He's made it pretty clear that he wants to see a bit more sort of freedom of speech on the site. So perhaps unblocking some people that have been blocked by previous Twitter management, and perhaps allowing it to become a little bit more free-flowing, a little bit more lawless, so to speak. There's been a lot of criticism, rightly or wrongly, depending on your view, on some of the approaches that Twitter has taken to date on content moderation and certain views being able to be espoused on the site. I think Mr. Musk has made it pretty clear that he would like to see bigger array of views from a wider range of folks, and that should lead to some interesting discussions. It'll be interesting to see whether or not he can actually make it a viable business and clean up some of the things and make the changes that I think long have been called for from many corners on Twitter.
Yes, I think both those on the left and the right are in some way celebrating, because I think a lot of people want that free-flowing exchange. And although I have to say, Elon Musk did say that while there would be that he's not doing away with all content moderation, it's not going to be a free-for-all. Those were his words. Hannah, what do you anticipate you will see from Twitter in the coming days? Do you think, for example, Donald Trump will be let back on?
I'm not sure. Well, we have time will tell if that happens. I think it's great so far that he's taken them over. It seemed for a while that he was just kind of playing with them, kind of giving them the run for their money. It was very, very amusing because for so long, many of these big tech companies have thought that they're kind of immutable. They can do whatever they want because they're a private company and no one's going to do anything about it, and no one can do anything about it until Elon came along. And it's interesting to see he fired some of the top executives, and now they're officially unemployed. I mean, yes, they've been getting big severances now, but I think it's nice to see. Hopefully, that freedom of speech will come back in a greater degree on Twitter. And for a long time, people who have been okay with censorship on Twitter, they have said that they're a private company; they can do whatever they want. Well, they still are a private company, and with Elon at the helm, they can decide to go in the direction of respecting freedom of speech and just making things more open to debate and dialogue, because for a while Twitter has just become kind of a cesspool for left-wing ideas, people being censored right, left, and center, tons of election interference, things like that. And it's been high time for a change like this to happen. So it's quite exciting to see, but the proof will be kind of in what he does, not in what he says. So I'm looking forward to seeing other moves that he'll be doing.
Elliot, do you think these changes that are happening just as we approach the US midterm elections, do you think Twitter's new direction will have some kind of influence on the outcome of the US election?
I think the midterms are too close. They're only 9-10 days away or something like that, a couple of weeks away. I think it'll be difficult for them to have a full, the changes at Twitter, that is, to have a full impact on the midterms. It'll be interesting to see, how it progresses over the next couple of years, though. The presidential is only 2 years away, and that actually goes pretty quickly because the campaign is so long, and that's where perhaps Twitter might be able to start to play an outsized influence on the campaign. I think the concern that a lot of people have is that it's, it allows for people to be trolled and for, people to espouse some really sort of terrible views and sort of attacking people. There is a great benefit to Twitter. I really like the service, but there are some sort of really sort of bad elements to it that do need to be cleaned up. The question will be, if Elon Musk makes some of these changes, does he gain more users or does he lose more users? Because it just becomes even worse than it was before. Interesting sort of floating of changes being made already. Verified, blue tick box or tick mark. So we'll see whether or not this actually is good for Twitter, if Elon Musk is good for Twitter, or if he becomes suddenly distracted with some other business and then stops thinking about it completely.
Welcome back. We're discussing various political issues that have come up in the past couple weeks, and joining me is Elliot Hughes, senior advisor to Summa Strategies, and Hannah Salamon-Vegh, political commentator. I think what stood out for me in recent days was Premier Danielle Smith. She's the new UCP, United Conservative Party premier from Alberta. She took over from Jason Kenney. She, in one of her first speeches, made an apology over vax mandates. Hannah, why don't you lead us in on that one? Were you surprised to hear these words from a Canadian premier?
Well, I was not surprised because I knew she was running on a campaign that was determined to bring back rights of unvaccinated people and to protect them. And the thing that surprised me was, a couple hours later after she said that the unvaccinated people in Alberta and across our country had faced some of the worst discrimination of any group she has seen in her lifetime. It was very disappointing to see her kind of apologize for saying that a few hours later because of pressure from the NDP. You'll never please the NDP as a conservative, even if you're just conservative in name only. NDP and Liberals will always hate you. I don't think it's good to be clamoring for the status of the most discriminated against group. Like, victimhood is not a thing to pursue or attain to. But in our time here, even the last 2 years in Canada, what people were being fired right, left, and center for a particular skin color that they have or a particular orientation, that doesn't happen here in Canada. That's not allowed. But firing unvaccinated people, who I might add are born that way. You're born unvaccinated. You didn't get to choose that. Firing people for their vaccine status was the biggest thing that we saw in the last 2 years when it came to the pandemic. And the thing I just want to mention is that in New York, the Supreme Court has just ruled that a bunch of sanitation workers have to be brought back, and they're also going to get back pay for being fired. And the Supreme Court ruled in New York that health officials do not have the right to say that people can be fired from their jobs because of medical choice. So here in Alberta now, she's talking about back pay for especially government workers in Alberta who are fired and discriminated against. So this is something that's positive. I just wish she hadn't apologized and kind of backpedaled for some of her statements, because that's showing weakness, which the NDP and Liberals will capitalize on.
So I'm going to let Elliot jump in there. I actually, so first of all, she didn't actually apologize for comments. I think she clarified them. And I actually don't think that that was a bad situation, because I think there was almost a conflation. And I don't think it was a comparison of victimhood. I think I understood what she had intended, but I could see how some Canadians could take that the wrong way, because, there are Canadians who have escaped communistic horrors and genocides and things like that.
Well, she was talking about here in Canada. Like, I believe she was mentioning here in Canada, that was one of the greatest human rights abuses she had seen. That's, I think, what she meant.
Elliot, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, well, I think it's been a pretty rough start for Premier Smith. With those comments, she had those comments about the war in Ukraine, and she had to, I think, sort of backtrack on that too. So it's been a bit rocky, I would say. It's very different running for the leadership than actually leading the province. Those are two very different things, and I think Ms. Smith is finding that out. What I do find interesting on what she's been doing is she's trying to seemingly form a bit of a Western bloc with Saskatchewan, and trying to sort of shore up Western Canada to quote unquote stand up for themselves. Premier Moe has made it quite clear as well that he's going to be looking for sort of a new deal with Ottawa and sort of standing up to Ottawa. That's what I'm most interested in. The vaccine stuff seems a bit of a sideshow, but the emerging Western coming together of Alberta and Saskatchewan versus sort of Ontario and federal Ottawa, and that dynamic and how that plays out, particularly as the economy changes and the economy worsens, will be something really fascinating to see if she can steer her way through those complicated waters.
Yeah, and I think you've both hit two major planks of her leadership campaign. And to your point, Elliot, you're correct. To go from a leadership, which is a very different animal, into immediately being the premier of a province and also heading into an election in 6 months is quite a drama. and it's a huge pivot. And I do believe that, yes, her Alberta Sovereignty Act that she's been pushing, that was one of her major planks of her campaign, is definitely becoming front and center. And I think she wanted to right off the bat address the COVID-19 vax mandate, because that was a major draw for her grassroots supporters. And, based on her previous actions within the past decade, where there was potentially some, credibility, wanting to make sure she's following through and just not going rogue, I think that was something she had to do. And I was very happy to see that she made an acknowledgement that there were some harms done with these vax mandates, because they were harmful, that's for sure. I think, as you said, she's trying to get her appropriate footing, because I think, she could have handled the way she presented it slightly better, that's for certain. And yeah, so I guess we'll have to see what she has in store in the next few months. Okay, we're going to come right back to you with another topic in just a few moments. Welcome back. I'm joined by Hannah Salamon-Vegh, political commentator, and Elliot Hughes, a senior advisor at Summa Strategies. We're unpacking a whole plethora of issues. And next up is Doug Ford and his former Solicitor General, Sylvia Jones, who's now the Minister of Health in Ontario. Apparently, they're saying they're not going to participate. They're not going to testify at the Emergencies Act inquiry. When I read this, I was kind of surprised, because it sounds like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be presenting in front of the inquiry. Why wouldn't the Premier of Ontario do the same? Why does he get to get off? Elliot, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, this seems to just be a continuation of Doug Ford sort of washing of his hands of Ottawa and the whole situation that unfolded, and seems to just be a continuation of that. He was nowhere to be found in January, February, when it was all going on. Sort of the only time he really got involved was when he started getting pressure at the border and trade. And this doesn't really surprise me. This is just a continuation of sort of his dereliction of duties as premier, and just sort of letting on Ottawa fend for itself and letting the federal government deal with it. Bottom line here is, Ottawa is in Ontario. There was a large provincial portion or engagement in this effort around the Emergencies Act and in the lead up to it. Mr. Ford should be there. He should testify, and we should find out, as inquiries do. The public needs to find out what was said, what happened, what his role was, and he should take part. I mean, that's pretty clear to me. Why he's doing it, I think it's pretty clear. It's probably looked pretty bad on him. So he's trying to avoid his duties as premier. I hope he shows up.
Well, he complimented Prime Minister Trudeau on his work during that Emergencies Act, during the Freedom Convoy. He was very complimentary of his steps. It's shocking to me that he wouldn't, at this point, show up and support it. Hannah, what are your takeaways? Do you think he'll pay a political price if he does not show up and testify, or do you think the price is greater if he does?
I think the price will be greater if he does not show up to it. I mean, it's just further confirming that he's a coward. He was very happy to support the Emergencies Act when Justin Trudeau brought it down, very happy to support the COVID measures that the federal government was doing. When it comes to giving answers to the Canadian people and to the people of Ontario in particular, he's not interested in that. Time and time again, we have politicians who are taking away our rights and freedoms. They never ask us. We're the ones who pay their salaries. We're the ones who pay their salaries all during the lockdowns. And then when we want answers, when we want to have clarity about what happened, whether it was justified or not, he doesn't want to show up. It's just showing that he likes to hide behind his Justin Trudeau, the big man up in Ottawa, who he likes to support when he's taking rights and freedoms away, but he does not want to testify. And I mean, if you have nothing to hide, just come, sit there for an hour and a half, like the police chief was. The Ottawa mayor has been testifying. He has said that, as we know, like Justin Trudeau was in hiding, just like Doug Ford. They didn't want to show up. They didn't want to meet with the convoy protesters. It stoked things and made it worse. So I think that he's afraid of having to face the fact that he didn't want to meet with the convoy protesters and try to get things, a bit under control, and just kind of stoked things. And he's afraid of, a lot of that being brought to light. So if he has nothing to hide, come testify.
Now, I don't know if there's any legislation that could compel, that can force somebody to testify, but if there isn't, my goodness, I think there should be. I think if, you're a political leader in this country and people have questions and there's been an inquiry, my goodness, you should have to answer the questions of the people. That is basic democracy. Why wouldn't we do that? I'm quite shocked, and I'm pleased to hear that both those, again, on the spectrum, the left, right, and the center, that people are vocal about this. Now, when all of this Emergencies Act was happening earlier in 2022, Elliot, Ford was heading into an election. Now he just won another majority. Is he saying, you know what, I don't need to answer to this. I don't have to answer for 4 more years. Is this going to be past the memory of the political electorate then?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, I think it already is in many ways. I don't think this has really captured the sort of general public's imagination at all, really. I think, you get testimony here and there. They'll probably make a little bit of news when the prime minister testifies, but generally other, people have, more pressing economic issues, frankly, to deal with and to think about than this. I think largely most Canadians agreed with the prime minister's decision. I think that's what the Inquirer will find ultimately. And I don't think, Mr. Ford feels like no one's paying attention, so maybe I'll just try to avoid it as best I can.
Well, I guess we'll have to see when the testimony comes out. I don't know if I agree that most Canadians agreed with the Emergencies Act. I'll have to see.
No, they did not. And the GoFundMe page showed opposite to that. It was the biggest GoFundMe page, and I think the history of GoFundMe, the amount of Canadians that donated to it, and the millions and millions of dollars. It was all across Canada.
But I think I agree, though, Elliot. Yes, people have moved past it because people are dealing with inflation, high interest rates. Things are happening at warp speed. We're going to be right back. Welcome back. We're wrapping up our political panel here on current issues with us today, and we have Hannah Salamon-Vegh. She's a political commentator, and Elliot Hughes. He's a senior advisor with Summa Strategies. So we're going to depart from some of these more dramatic topics, but this is actually quite a could be potentially scary one, a very important one for Canadians to be aware. And I think many Canadians aren't aware of what just happened. But a Supreme Court justice issued a decision, and it had a close majority, that there will be reforms to the sex offender registry. And it was determined at one point to be unconstitutional. Elliot, do you want to unpack this for us? What does this mean for Canadians?
Yeah, well, I'm not a lawyer, so take what I have to say with sort of that in mind. My understanding is that the Supreme Court has ruled in a pretty narrow decision, 5-4, I believe, that it was essentially saying a sex offender should not be on the sex offender list or registry forever or for their lifetime. Now, I think that's the sort of the ruling. Look, I don't think anyone disagrees that this is sort of a moral, disgusting, despicable behavior. What the justices have to do, though, is sort of take the issue and sort of, look at, other rules and laws in place in other cases, and, the Constitution and think about those things. And that's where they sort of came down. They said, thinking about the Constitution, the sort of being on this list for forever or for your life is sort of unconstitutional. Now, they have given the Parliament of Canada a year to fix the law, so to speak. So it's not like this goes into play sort of today or tomorrow.
Right.
The Parliament has time to react and to fix, this law and sort of improve it, I suppose, in the eyes of the Supreme Court. So, I don't think this story is over. It's just beginning. It is a difficult one, for sure. And, I think everyone agrees that, there's nothing sort of worse than what these sort of individuals do. I think what's interesting is figuring out where do you sort of find that balance with what we've got, the Constitution and sort of and looking like we're being tough on crime, which we want to be on these types of criminals.
Okay, so Elliot, I know you're in Ottawa, so I'm going to ask you really quickly, follow up. Any idea where the Liberals or the Conservatives are going to come on this? Because, once you put something back into the Parliament, which is the right place for obviously laws to happen, it becomes so political. It's the nature of the animal. So what do you have any anticipation what the Liberals or the Conservatives will do on this issue?
Well, it will become political. I would imagine the Conservatives are going to take a hard line and probably sort of suggest that no, this should be a lifetime on the list, and that they disagree with the courts. The Liberals are going to have to or will look at it a little bit more carefully, and I don't know where they're going to land yet, but it's going to be a difficult one. And I would for sure imagine that there's going to be a squeeze politically on the Liberals on this one.
Okay, Hannah, I want to bring you in. You're a woman, I'm a woman. We hear sex offenders. I don't know, my back gets up. What are your thoughts on this? Canada closely cooperates even in the United States. We share a lot of this information. Do you think there should, but at the same token, I also recognize that sometimes people can rehabilitate. So are we impeding their rehabilitation if we're keeping them on for this lifetime list? What are your thoughts on that?
It's not just lifetime listing, it's also mandatory listing. So it's going to be up to the discretion of each judge, whether they think this person should be put on the list, depending on whether they're at risk for repeat offending. And actually, when I was preparing for the show, I looked at the sex offending list in the States, which is public. Google it. And I looked at New York, I looked at Tampa, I looked at Dallas, and you can click on the person's image. Their offenses are listed there, and majority of those people have repeat offenses over and over and over again. And actually, the sex offender list in the States, at least the ones that I saw, and I clicked on a lot of them were child rapists, child molesters, and over again, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. It's absolutely disgusting. And here in Canada, this list is not public, and they say it's because of privacy. What about the privacy of the victims? What about their rights? What about the fact they have to go on the street? And you can just Google these cases, countless cases of these repeat offenses against children in particular. Stealing children out of homes, sexually assaulting them, keep doing it over and over again, and they're just let on the streets again. And it's up to the victim to fight to get these people back in jail. Once you, especially are a repeat offender, you go to jail for the rest of your lifetime. And I think that it's just enabling this type of crime because there's not proper punishment for this type of behavior. It's rewarding criminals and it's punishing victims of the crime. So I'm very upset about seeing this. And I hope that once it goes to Parliament that proper laws are put back in place. And I'm sad to see the work that Stephen Harper did to toughen these types of policies. I'm sad to see them being overrun. And there was recently another Supreme Court ruling saying that automatism could be used to justify sexual assault, being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. It's ghastly.
Okay, well, we're going to have to deal with that another day. Thank you both for coming on today and sharing your insights. Appreciate it.